Hi everyone, welcome to another episode on Talks with Today Evergreen. But in this particular episode, we're just going to be talking about design engineering. So sometime last year, design engineering was a very buzzword, right? Where industry experts basically got to talk about how it kind of changes the whole development processes and what it's so exciting. Like it sounds so like a very exciting role, right? So I had in my mind to bring Baytash to come have a discussion around design engineering to tell us how we could translate from a front end developer to maybe to a design engineer, right? What it takes, what the role actually means, right? What it takes, what they do day to day because it's a design engineer. So that's just what this episode is gonna be about. That's just what the discussion is definitely gonna be about. Hi, Baitash.
Hi, Ido. Thanks for having me.
All right, amazing. So let's quickly just jump right into it. Just give us a quick introduction of yourself, what you've been up to the last years, just a quick introduction of what you do currently.
Sure. Currently, I am a design engineer at Atio. I build the website. We are a small team. We're 2 engineers and 1 designer working on the website, and we're part of the marketing team. There is another engineering team working on the product who also have their own kind of like product engineers and design engineers, but we're concentrated on the website. Before this, my career basically happened in kind of like 3 chapters. The first chapter was that I was freelancing, doing a lot of small projects, basically a full stack developer at that point, working with small businesses, people around me. And then the second chapter was when I was an academic. I worked at the university and also doing at a few companies, working on innovation projects. My specialty was human-computer interaction, but I worked on things that don't really happen on the screen. So it was with interactive robots, some spatial design where we work with like room scale installations and things like that, gesture recognition, cameras, computer vision, and building interfaces with these things, tools for building all of those prototypes. So that was a lot of experimental stuff in the second chapter of my career. And then the third chapter, after moving on from academia, is now where I've been working with startups and I've been concentrating on front-end design engineering, both for products and for websites, for the last 2 years or so. And Altio is kind of the culmination of that. It's a CRM company that's customer relationship management, which is basically software for salespeople and those doing sales-like activities. And we are quite proud of what we build. I think we have one of the best products on the market, and we strive to make the website be a reflection of that. And from the reception that we're getting, I feel like it seems to be working.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually working. I get to see the posts. I get to see the updates from the team. Like amazing stuff you guys are doing over there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that was a really amazing intro from you, right? So let's just quickly jump right into the conversation. So what exactly is design engineering? What does a design engineer do? Yeah.
Great question. Design engineers do a few different things depending on where they are, at which company they are, at which stage the company is, and what particular team on the company. I've actually written a little essay on this topic. I have a publication called Design Disciplin, which I publish on Twitter. I also make a podcast under that publication, and we do have a website hosted on Substack where we publish articles. So on Design Discipline, I have an article called Design Engineering 101. I explain some of those things, so I can maybe go over some of those. But if your audience wants a little bit of deeper reading and some more resources and links and so on, there's always that article, and we continue to publish. There will probably be more articles in the future, although I'm a bit slow in writing them. If we get back to the topic, what even is a design engineer, right? So a design engineer is basically the combination of a designer and an engineer. So it's not like a separate discipline. I don't think there's a separate activity called design engineering. It's what happens when you learn both design and engineering separately, and you find yourself a role in a company or in a project where you can practice both of those things at the same time. So as an engineer, how does this differentiate from front end? First of all, if you kind of call yourself the design engineer, if you have the design engineering skill set, which is design plus engineering, then you don't need a designer to build things with, right? So you can just design the UI and also build it. Normally, a lot of front-end developers that I know rely on a designer to create the designs and create the UX and make the interfaces a look and feel and colors and typography and everything. But as a design engineer, you have the skills and you have the knowledge in typography and graphic design and all of those things to be able to do all of that yourself if needed. This doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. So for example, in my work, I do work with a designer, which is the second thing that differentiates a design engineer from a plain front-end developer or like a vanilla front-end developer, which is that you can work with designers very fast and you can exchange information at a different level. So my conversations with our designer, for example, we're going deep into like typography and grid systems, and we're talking about actually how to improve the design and the design. So I have plenty of input in that area, and it's a very enjoyable, very pleasurable conversation sharing those things together. Finally, so what differentiates a design engineer from a designer also is to be able to work on production grade things. So like I said, I don't consider design engineering a separate discipline. It's basically the combination of design and engineering, which means that there are a lot of situations where you will be expected to perform at the level of a engineer working on production code and production environments. I deal with a lot of sort of infrastructure things, the internals of our website, of Next.js, of deployment platforms, things like that. So that's basically also what front-end developers do, but designers do not do. So you kind of combine all of these things and it becomes a design engineer. But some design engineers also specialize on building tools for this entire stack. So for example, Rasmus Andersson, who is a famous sort of designer slash engineer, who has built the typeface Inter. So you can make things like typefaces, you can make things like design tools, plugins, design systems, those kinds of things where you really need those skills of design and edge to come together in the same person to be able to do those things. So those are basically like the four things that sort of differentiate the design engineer. What they actually do is a bit of a different question, because okay, this is a skill set that you have, but how do you put this to use? How do you create value in a tech company or in an organization using these things? Usually we see that design engineers find their place in 3 or maybe 4 places, depending on how you count. One of them is marketing, which is what I focus on right now. So this is basically web design engineering, where you make the website of a company. So if a company is large and has a lot of resources and wants to make a new website, examples of this might be like Stripe or I don't know, Atio, which is the company where I work, where we invest a lot into the website. So you might employ design engineers to work on the site, as opposed to using services like Framer or Webflow and piecing it together using other no-code solutions and things like that. So that's one thing that design engineers do. The second is you might work on products, which is closer to more traditional front-end engineering, but it results in a much more polished product, a more impressive UI experience if you're able to find these people that combine design and edge skills and put them to work. And then finally, a lot of design engineers do R&D, which is sort of innovation projects, think prototypes basically for new kind of things, where again, you want the same person to move very fast and create, interesting prototypes without necessarily involving a separate designer or a separate engineer. So that's really the main strength of the design engineer, is that you can go into the product or you can go into the website and you can make improvements, you can make new things without needing another person. Because as you add people to the process, if you need a designer to help you with the design, or if you need an engineer to help you with the engineering, to be able to actually create things and build things and put things into production, that significantly increases the time burden on the entire team. But when you combine these skills in one person, you can move very fast on all of these things. So that's basically the gist of what design engineering is about and why it's so popular these days.
All right, amazing. So I just have a question on top of my head right now, right? So are you trying to say, if I'm a front-end developer, for example, I have front-end skills, right? And I understand design principles. Can I call myself a design engineer? Can I say I know design and engineering at that point? So now this basically leads to the next question, which is what are the skill sets for a design engineer? Right? What are the skill sets? What do you think they should have under their skill belts or their belts, right? As an engineer, what should they know?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've discussed variants of this question a lot with designers who are interested in the design engineering role. And to be honest, for them, it's a more difficult thing because they have to learn front end and software engineering and a bit of computer science and things like that, which is a kind of I've just observed that it's more challenging for designers to learn that rather than for a developer to learn design, especially if this is a developer who's already interested in design. So I would say the front-end developer who wants to go into design engineering is already at an advantage compared to any other person who wants to go into design engineering. As to like how do you call yourself a design engineer? Anyone can call themselves a design engineer, but actually getting that job, actually performing that duty in an organization, in a company is a different matter. To be able to do that, I would say that well, you need design skills. So that's like the category of skills that you need. But specifically, what are the design skills and how do you get them? I guess is the more interesting question. So I find that front-end engineers usually already learn quite a bit about UI design and UX design and interfaces and so on. So you already know as a front-end developer the standards and the components that are available and the interactions that are possible. You know that there are sort of button elements and form elements in HTML, or if you go into native development, you know what the components are that are available. You know the standards already. So you're already starting from a good place. In order to utilize that effectively, in order to sort of expand your design skills, there are basically two places mainly that you need to look at, and maybe three. The first is UX design, where UX design and also, so I'm just going to throw out some keywords out there. So if people want to go and search and look at courses, books, things like that. These are UX design, human-computer interaction, human factors, interaction design. So these ideas, these topics, you can find a lot of books and courses and videos and a lot of things on these things. But basically the idea is to turn your eye to human perception and human psychology when you're operating in these domains or learning about them. And then you think in terms of, okay, how does human attention work? How does the human eye, human vision, and human thought and human cognition work? And how can I arrange the things on the screen? How can I design the graphics and the interfaces to interface in the best way with the way that humans operate? So in a way, UX design is understanding humans and how humans think and how humans see and how humans use their attention and how they're not able to use it and so on. Our websites like Laws of UX, for example, I'm just going to double check to make sure that I get it right. Yeah, it is called Laws of UX, where they talk about the different rules and laws of UX design. A lot of these come from sort of basic design principles or ideas like Gestalt principles, for example. Gestalt is basically the German word for design. And these are ideas formulated and studied and written down maybe like 50 or 100 years ago by scholars and designers, which concern things like how graphic elements can be grouped or ungrouped, or what color or shape does to human perception and what we see and what we don't see, what we miss, and so on and so forth. So I know it hasn't been a super structured explanation, but again, this is a huge topic, So if you look into UX design, human-computer interaction, these are what people talk about. So this is the first field that I think a design engineer should familiarize themselves with, to be able to independently design interfaces, to be able to interface with designers effectively, and to do the things that designers do. The second field is, I would say, graphic design, which is slightly different from human factors and interaction design and so on, because it has more connections to art and creative direction and artistic direction and all of those things. So in order to learn those things, what I found very useful and what I've done throughout the years is to really go back to like the basics of the resources that are meant for graphic designers. There are a lot of books out there, and I sort of have this stack of books next to me right here, which I've chosen to illustrate what I'm talking about here. So I have books like The Elements of Typographic Style. Oops, sorry, I hit the mic. This one by Robert Brinkhurst, which is a very famous book about typography, very detailed sort of instruction manual for how you deal with grid systems and how you deal with various properties of letters and how you use fonts and even how you design typefaces. So this is an amazing book. I've actually read this book from cover to cover, which not many people do, and it was amazing. It's also a very well-written book. Robert Brinkhurst is an excellent author, so I highly recommend this one, for example. Another one, a more basic one, was Thinking in Type. So this is a manual of typography. Again, these are books designed for graphic designers and type designers and so on. So if you go to design school, if you go to art school, you might study some of these books. But these have, again, they teach you the terminology and ideas behind type and letter forms and grid systems and arranging pages and so on and so forth, the terminology of graphic design and editorial design. So these are tremendously valuable to learn from. One of my favorite authors in this field also is Kimberly Ellum. Sorry, I'm hitting the microphone again. And she has written these books. One of them is Typographic Systems, which analyzes different kinds of layout systems that designers use. There is Grid Systems, which is a different book. There's a famous Orange Grid Systems book. This is not that one, but this is, I find, more accessible, a little better written, actually. I also have the Grid Systems books somewhere, the old classic one. But this I would recommend more to like beginners and front-end developers. Or The Geometry of Design, again from the same author, which has many examples of different sort of ratios and geometric principles, primarily based on like the golden ratio, but also other sorts of sort of geometrical systems. The Vignelli canon. So once you get through these basics, this is like level 1 of learning graphic design. Maybe the second level is where you start going into examples and case studies and developing taste and having like, you start having favorite designers and you start having favorite design styles. So one of my favorite designers, Massimo Vignelli, for example, has written this one, the Vignelli Canon, which is an explanation of his design style. And he is famous for like using very few typefaces and doing like these very sort of high dynamic range responsive graphic designs. So these sorts of books which explain the particular style of a particular designer, or books that are written by designers that show a portfolio of their work and their taste and their style, are another place that you can look into. And finally, the application of this design, the application of graphic design, we can broadly call it marketing and brand, right? So learning about brand is the next step of this kind of education. I have here books like The Brand Book, which explains the components of a brand and the brand identity design process so this is a senior executive who's worked on brands like Dove and Cadbury and sort of large-scale enterprise branding. I have here another book, Identity Design. This is an excellent one with several case studies of brand identity designs. And finally, I have another one that is dedicated to logo design. This is called Symbol. And it has a lot of examples of different kind of symbols for logos and things like that. So these types of books, and I choose books specifically rather than like online courses and things like that, because graphic design historically also has been very strongly tied to like print. And I find that the best knowledge, some of the most interesting resources on graphic design and this sort of domain is actually in books, in printed matter, rather than out there in other sources. Although you can go on YouTube, especially if you're a beginner, you can go on YouTube and blogs and Twitter and all of these resources. You can find a lot of great things yourself too in these topics. But I really recommend actually buying physical books or going to the library if you're studying graphic design, because there's very valuable knowledge and it's also very neatly packaged. You know, when you write the book, you really think about what is the structure of the knowledge, how do I explain things one by one, and these authors especially have done this very well. If we look at also online resources, finally, there is an ebook called Refactoring UI, which specifically talks about UI design. I think, if I'm not wrong, this is written by the authors of Tailwind CSS, and they explain sort of their interface design philosophy and how to use spacing and typography and so on and so forth. But those resources only take you so far. Like, to be able to really do justice to design engineering and in terms of like creating original designs and communicating effectively with designers who are more artistically inclined, really going back to the basics and studying graphic design from books, it has been the most sort of beneficial thing that I've done in my learning journey. Finally, the third area of design engineering is motion design. So we talked about UX, we talked about graphics, and there's motion finally, which is animations and transitions of things and so on. I don't have a lot of very strong resources to recommend in that area. Of course, there's a lot of things on YouTube. There's a lot of articles and posts and so on out there that you can look at for animation design principles and easings and things like that. But there's one particular course, it's by Emil Kowalski, called Animations on the Web. And that one is also a very strong one for specifically front-end developers to learn motion design. So to recap, those are the three areas. First, UX design, human-computer interaction design, human factors, that sort of human side of this whole situation. And then there's the artistic side, which is graphic design. And then there's motion design. And you can tap into different resources online and also in printed matter to learn these things. That's the journey that I would recommend to a front-end developer, to go deeper in these things.
All right. One question, right? This is a very big mind shift right? For a regular front-end developer, right? Because you talked about a lot of books, about a lot of content to consume, a lot of processes to go through, right? Before you could really have solid foundations and design and also bringing in your engineering side as a front-end developer. So can we just quickly talk about the mind shift? Because this is really, really a very large mind shift if you agree with me, right? So can we just talk about the mind shift required? Because yeah.
Interesting question to me, because to me the shift in mind has been the other way. Like I said, I used to work in academia and R&D and innovation, where I was not, for example, working with one particular technology over the course of 5 or 10 years in academic research and R&D and innovation. I wrote code in C Sharp and Unity and Windows native applications and web development, and I used all kinds of web platforms. I coded a lot of Python. I work with deep learning, machine learning, AI kinds of things. So I had basically no limits in terms of the technology that I didn't specialize in a particular technology or framework or even a branch of development. I was just doing whatever it takes to realize the vision of the projects that we were doing. And the mindset shift that I had to go through when I went into the career of design engineering commercially was the opposite, because I had to narrow down. I had to say, okay,
Okay.
now my tool of choice is React and Next.js and Tailwind and this and that and Framer Motion and all, this the tech stack that we use, and that's it. So I'm not allowed to go and like find a solution in Python or well, I'm kind of allowed, but it's going to be harder to deploy and it's not going to fit in with like, there's no one to do code review on that and things like, so it doesn't fit in the organizational structure. So you kind of have to understand also there is value in being specialized and being committed to certain front-end technologies, because when you go into practicing this commercially, if you want to do design engineering at a company, uh, the environment that you operate in is going to be very similar to what traditional front-end engineers do. And actually being focused on that is, in a way, a strength, is a tremendous advantage if you have very strong grounding in front-end development. Expand, like what is the mindset shift? I think from a mentality perspective, from almost like a spiritual sort of idea perspective, I guess you have to understand that if you want to do something impressive, if you want to make good money, if you want to operate in a place where you're working on impressive apps and impressive artifacts and things that look good and are appreciated, things that make you famous in a way, if you want to work at a good company, if you want to have a role where the role is not only just traditional engineering, but it's a combination of two disciplines and requires necessarily a mental expansion. So if you want these things, which not everyone gets to have, right? So these are nice things to have, and a lot of people in their careers want these kinds of things. But if you desire these things, the way to get these things is not going to be to do normal work. So super normal achievements that are beyond the normal, require input beyond the normal, and that is first of all the thing that people need to understand if they want to go into any career path. If you want to make it as an entrepreneur, if you want to make it as a football player or whatever, if you want to be really good and have the ability to, for example, work at any company you desire or have any job you want, it's going to necessitate some extra effort. And that's the mentality that we need to adopt, basically. It's not going to just come from doing ordinary things. It is going to take extra hours. It is going to take some sacrifice where you maybe do certain things less. For example, in the last 2 years or so, I have significantly less. I used to go out a lot and party a lot when I was younger, and I used to work out a lot more. I did boxing on one day and gym the other and running the other day and yoga and the other. Now I work 3 times a week, for example, and I see my friends maybe once a week rather than 3 or 4 days a week. So those sacrifices are necessary. You have to put time into the thing that you want if you want to get that thing, especially if that thing is something that everyone wants and something that's sort of extraordinary in a way. I mean, these are not sort of super extraordinary. I'm not talking about maybe becoming a billionaire or something like that, but still, it's not what the vast majority of the population does, right? So it is going to take extraordinary effort. So that's mindset shift number one. I would say that's necessary. Just to accept that fact. And then another thing that I found, so in connection to that operationally, tactically, Something that I found very useful for when I have things that I want to achieve that I'm not necessarily achieving yet is to track the time that I'm putting into these things, especially in development projects, especially in skill expansion. So when I was learning Next.js, for example, and I was doing it through building projects. I built like 3 or 4 or 5 different little web applications to learn that particular framework. And there was a time when I started doing this that I wasn't making much progress at all. But things started shifting and I started making much faster progress when I started tracking my time. So I installed a tracker on my computer, basically spyware that's looking at everything I do on the computer. I make sure I look at the sort of the graph of how I spend my time on the computer, and I can see exactly how many hours do I spend in Visual Studio Code or Cursor or whatever IDE you have. How many hours do I spend doing this project, that project, looking at this website, that website. And that way I can have this feedback loop where I make sure that I spend like at least 1 hour per day, for example, on a particular project or on a particular path. Set aside 1 hour per day reading these books or doing the courses or doing a project which might become your portfolio project. Set aside a goal of, for example, posting once a day on social media with the kinds of projects that you want to do, which may initially be just the work that you do by yourself, but that will capture the attention of other people that might pay you to do that kind of work. So if you put time into these things, and first of all, you simply accept that you have to put the time. It's not going to happen if you don't put the time. And then you sort of track that time and make sure that the time is actually being spent doing that thing, then I believe it's not more difficult than that. And this goes for anything. I'm not speaking specifically for design engineering, but it could be like being a good basketball player. It could be, being a good graphic designer or learning watercolors or whatever it is.
All right, amazing. So can we quickly talk about the potential career paths in design engineering?
Yeah, of course. This is a difficult one. A lot of really great design engineers that I'm looking at, that I'm familiar with on the internet, for example, I'm looking at their careers and I see that a lot of them are staying as design engineers, and simply the career progression for a lot of people in this field is going to work at a higher level company, for example. You start at the early stage, smaller company, and then you make a name for yourself as a design engineer. You move to a bigger company where the salaries are bigger and so on and so forth. So there is this career path where you can stay as an individual contributor. You can stay as a design engineer, but through making transitions to bigger companies, companies that are better resourced, that are doing better commercially, etc., you can improve your career situation. Another path that I'm seeing is people become founders. And this is a very underrated path, actually. And it's uniquely, well, maybe not uniquely, but so design engineering is one of the rare jobs where it's sort of easier to go from design engineering to, for example, being a founder, or to being a sort of a multidisciplinary sort of person that has to do a lot of things. Because you're already doing 2 jobs. You're already basically doing design and engineering. If you add on top of that, recruiting, management, leadership, fundraising, if you improve your skill stack with these things, you can quickly get to the point where you have the skills to run an entire company that's making software. A great example of this is Jordan Singer, who started building prototypes and doing sort of these R&D types of things, and then he started to, so he went to Figma. He worked there for a while as a designer and engineer, and now he has his own company. I forgot the name. I think it's called Main. But he's a great example of becoming a founder. Another example a person I was following in my academic days was Ivan Popirev, who was working at Google's R&D lab. And now he has his own company, is doing his own sort of products and projects. So that path is also available, and it's a path that is closer, or a path of relatively lesser resistance for design engineers compared to maybe a traditional engineer or a traditional designer or any sort of singular career. It's also today very easy to get into like indie hacking. You see that, people like Peter Levels or Danny Postma or Mark Louvion, sort of these famous sort of indie hackers that are doing well and attention on Twitter and other socials. I would consider that these people are design engineers because they are building their own software, doing their marketing even. their marketing videos, assets, graphics, their UI designs, everything, as well as, of course, the engineering, running the entire business by themselves. So that's one of the paths there. So those are some of the interesting paths. And of course, there's other paths such as, you become a manager of engineers. You become, maybe, if you want to go towards more like the design or marketing route rather than the engineering, you might go towards that and become a creative director or a head of marketing or the leader of the team, which is building the product or building a website or a sub sort of set of that. So there are many, many paths available. But we have to be mindful because a lot of these paths necessitate that once you go there, once you do the sort of career promotion, you become something else, right? So if you go and become like so one of the paths that, for example, in my position as the engineer of the website, that what I might go into is being the lead of the website or lead of the sort of marketing situation over time, which means that I'm not going to code very much anymore. If I'm coding 80% of my day now, then it's going to be like maybe 10%. And the rest of my time is going to be managing people, managing creative work, and so on and so forth. If I go become an engineering manager, it's going to be doing other things that engineering managers do, hiring being a big part of that, for example. So that's why when you look at the design engineers out there who are sort of better known, a lot of them stay as design engineers and go between companies because that's what they enjoy doing. So it's a very rich path. I think it's a very opportune path. It has a lot of optionality, a lot of different things that you could do. But one does need to be careful about what one wishes and one wants, because sometimes you get what you want, but it's not really what you imagine it will be.
Yeah. So speaking about design engineering right now, so I've gotten to see the portfolio of the engineers from Figma and also Vessel, right? I think those are basically I could say those are the Ford company kind of like pushing this particular role. Like they're very popular.
Yes.
They have design engineers and they hire regularly for these roles.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the portfolio? What do you think about building out the portfolios? Let me give you a good scenario. So for example, myself, right, I'm a front-end developer. I build front-end projects, and I'm looking forward to want to like become a design engineer, and I want to upgrade my design skills. Basically, upgrading my design skills, right? Then once I'm done with that, I want to build out portfolio. I want to build out my portfolio. I want to build out projects to show that I have the idea of a design engineer. I could design, and I could also breathe life to this my design, right, on the web or mobile or wherever platform. So let's quickly just talk about the portfolio side of this particular role.
Yeah, the portfolio is an interesting subject because a lot of people think of like the portfolio as being for the sake of the portfolio, and in my opinion, the portfolio it's not an end in itself; it's a means to an end. So it's a device for achieving something, which is usually to get a job of a particular kind. So when you construct the portfolio, I think first of all you need to really think, and you need to know what kind of job and what kind of company you are looking for, and you need to have conversations with people who are either at those companies or those kinds of companies or around that kind of role and ecosystem that you're aiming to get into. And based on the information that you get from those conversations and those people, and also looking at examples of maybe becoming inspired, as you said, from people from Vercel, Figma, the companies, Audio, our company, or Stripe and design studios and things like that. You have to really tailor the portfolio to be specific to your aim, which is like what kind of company you want to work for, what is the position you want to go to, and so on. A lot of companies, ours included, also value taste a lot. So this is one of the also things about design engineering that's interesting and different from traditional front-end development, and also a sort of a hot topic these days in technology, which is the notion of taste and style and creative direction. And a lot of companies are, in a way, looking for these designers and design engineers, more so for designers, definitely for designers, somewhat also for design engineers. They are looking for a particular style that resonates with the style that the company already has, so that if you hire this person, you don't need to give this person a lot of creative direction, a lot of instruction on how to execute the style of the company. So that would be my advice on the portfolio front. Really investigate and talk to people in the industry and see what they're looking for, what they want to see. I might even be wrong here. This is why I'm saying you got to talk to the people that are relevant, that are around the role and around the companies that you're looking for, because my advice might be wrong for your particular
Yeah.
case, and maybe the company where you want to work at doesn't value taste at all, but they want something with someone with really solid React engineering skills and some, basic grasp of typography and things like that. So every company is specific, every role, if you're going to work on the product side, if you're going to work on the marketing side, is specific, and you got to investigate and tailor it according to that. For example, I have very few open source projects. I have some from the past, from my academic years, but they are not really relevant. They're a completely different tech stack, completely different philosophy, mentality of what we do now. And so that side of my portfolio wasn't very strong. But when I was hired at Atio, I was told that one of the reasons was that I had a particular style, a particular expression of my tastes in design and graphic design and interface design. And that was resonating. It was very close to what they wanted to have. And they chose to hire me rather than other people, because I could contribute that to the team. But other teams might be looking for other things. So that's the thing. There are no universal rules of portfolio design. It's very job specific. It's very company specific. And also, finally, on the topic of the portfolio, I think an underrated function of a designer's or design engineers or developers portfolio is to become a practice ground for the skills that you want to have, such as, if you want to learn Framer Motion, now called Motion, like new libraries for doing things. If you want to learn Tailwind, if you want to learn particular frameworks, just build your portfolio in that framework and using that library and practice those skills. Use the portfolio as a practice ground, because it's not so much like a fake project that's just going to evaluate. It's your portfolio. It's used for a particular purpose. But it also gives you the freedom to do whatever you want. So those are my musings on the portfolio, and I hope someone gets something out of them.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. The audience really appreciate that. So now speaking on portfolio again, could you give us some project ideas, right? Of what we could put on our portfolio, just to give that feel that we are a design engineer. Just project ideas that could come like top of your head right now.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I can tell you the projects that I built for myself when I was
Okay.
learning. The first one was was it the first one? I know one of them was a survey. So I was working with the students at the time. I was teaching at the university as an academic, and I was giving them a lot of like career advice and what to do. I was having a lot of these conversations. So I built this like survey tool, this questionnaire. It was called Design Navigator. And you
Hmm.
fill out some questions, and then it tells you if you should go freelancing, or if you should go find a job at a company, or if you should start your own company, or so on. It's like a personality test for designers to
Okay.
choose your career path. And so for design engineering specifically, you can do whatever you want. Like, this was one of the things that I did, but you have to really pay attention. You have to invest a lot of time into the user interface and interaction design and graphic design. Just make it really beautiful and impressive. So that's what I tried to do with that. As well as at the time, I was not really using Next.js and React very much, and it was sort of my training ground. I developed my skills in Next.js and React and JavaScript through doing these projects. So that was one of the things that I did. Survey. Another thing was I made a bookstore. It's still available. It's at bookstore.designdiscipline.com, and it's just a curation of my, some of the books that I've shown you. They're on there, and it has affiliate links that people can go and click on, and I get like a little commission. And that was also, like I said, you still keep practicing different technologies, right? So for example, was my way of learning how to use a CMS with Next.js, which I was learning at the time. And then what else did I build? I can tell you. Actually, I have a little list on my website because I keep forgetting after building so many projects. Oh yeah. Well, these days AI is obviously a lot very popular. Everyone's talking about AI. You have to
Yeah.
kind of know how to use AI in your workflow, but also as a developer, it's beneficial if you know how to interface with AI, use AI in the application that you're building. So you can find problems that you're experiencing in your daily workflow and make applications or plugins or whatever to solve these. So for example, I made something called Color AI, which is at colorai.com,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and it generates color palettes based on like a little prompt. And it also
Mm-hmm.
explains to you, because in brand identity design, I generate the color palette and I have to explain to the client why I picked these colors, right? So it finds these like scientific explanations of like why are these colors appropriate for this sort of project. Another thing I made was a community showcase. There's an artist, Visualize Value, who is quite popular on Twitter, and he was also hosting a community online, and a lot of people in this community were doing projects. So one of my sort of Next.js React learning projects also was to build a showcase. I built a website which pulled those projects, information from Notion, and just put them on, like just showcased everyone's projects as a list or as a grid or something like that. So you can think of these projects as, solving problems that you have, such as, when I was doing brand identity, I needed to do color schemes, so color AI. It could be a way of solving problems that you find yourself solving for others. So for example, I was giving advice to students. Instead of that, I made a questionnaire which automates that. Another thing is
Mm-hmm.
to connect to people, to connect to a community, and really sort of, make yourself known, make yourself established with those people, build those connections. That would be like a community projects showcase, for example, or a website for a club or something that you're a member of. So things like that. And also, like right now, also what I'm building is a social media scheduler. It's one of my side projects, or it's my one side project right now that I'm building. And it's giving me sort of, again, learning new skills, right? I'm learning to use the Twitter API and the Instagram API and all these things like that.
Uh-huh.
So you have to look at these problems that you're experiencing in your own life. Because with these side projects, what you don't want to do is to have to go and do user research. So if I wanted to do
Mm.
something that, if I said, I want to make an app for bartenders, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
bartender. I have no idea how to make an app for bartenders. If I make one, it's going to be useless because I don't know what they need. So I
Yes.
need to go speak to a bartender. Or if I want to make an app for bicycle racers, I need to find bicycle racers and learn from them and spend time with them. And you don't want that for your side project. It's not really
Mm-hmm.
efficient. If you're working, professionally in a company, you have UX researchers, things like that. People do that in the business environment. But for side projects, you really need to focus on things that are very close to you. Solve your own problems, solve problems of people that you're already interacting with, you're already engaged in the problem, you know what the UX is like, and also copy. Like the first like personality test application that I did, for example, was a copy of another personality test kind of application that someone else did for a different type of question, but it was exactly the same UX, and I changed the design of it. Of course, theirs was like green and white and so on, and had shadows or whatever. I made it black and white and sort of like this Vercel kind of style.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's what you want to focus on. Like just find these problems that are close to you. And in the age of AI, you can actually do fairly complicated things. Like the social media scheduler, for example, is something that I would not do without AI. It's not super complicated. It's not the most complicated development project,
Yeah.
but it's complicated enough that I wouldn't do it. But now with
Mm-hmm.
AI, I can, like the entire backend, for example, is something I can just generate with the help of the AI. I mean, really, like the bar for side projects and personal projects is really increasing.
Amazing. 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 Amazing.
Yeah.
So let's just quickly talk about the tools design engineers use. Could quickly talk about maybe most of the tools they get to use on day-to-day basics. I
Mm.
could say VS Code number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give us a list of tools design engineers get to use every day.
I don't think it's different from what ordinary front-end developers use. So we use VS
Huh.
Code, we use, React, Next.js, Tailwind, Framer Motion. We use CMS, which might be, Storyblock or Sanity or whatever you have. We use what else? Cursor, of course, is our editor of choice these days with heavy AI integration. I've also been trialing Windsurf, which is
Yeah.
another AI IDE. Chrome is my browser these days, although I've flirted with Arc and I've used some other things, but Chrome is the most used web browser, so it just makes sense to use what everyone is using to view the website. And then Figma, of course. So maybe I would say my Figma skills are up there with the designers themselves, and I can
Hmm.
operate Figma at a high level, which is necessary if, like, sometimes design engineering is about seeing the fine details and understanding the design details without specifically being told in like a note or something like that. So I can look at a Figma file and I can go in dev mode and measure it. Sometimes I copy the Figma file over and then I make modifications. I send to the designer, hey, should it be maybe like this or something like that? So maybe
Mm-hmm.
in that side, although I think a front-end developer should also be able to operate Figma or a tool like Figma at a high level. For a design engineer, it's really not a question. You have to really be skilled in that. I sometimes also use maybe some things that front-end developers don't use, which a design engineer might be interested in, would be things that are more sort of image editing heavy, like Photoshop, Lightroom. I do have some idea around like photography and photo editing and things like that, which I sometimes do for the website. Although after I do it, our designers kind of take it and they do it even better. So I do like the first iteration sometimes. But yeah, and of course like pen and paper and things like that. But I think 80%, if not more, of my time is spent on just, the IDE, the cursor, VS Code, whatever it is, and the browser, and some in Figma and image editing and video editing and those kinds of tools. Have this, we're talking about mentality, right? So my mentality is that if it's software, I can use it. I don't believe that there's any software that I can't figure out, unless it's like some super specialized like engineering analysis software where you have to know the scientific ideas of that domain. But if it's just software made for people to use, then you can use it and you should be able to use it. I don't think there's any limitations to what kinds of software to use. And this is a mentality thing that I would recommend people to adopt.
All right. All right. So one last question, right? So how long do you think it's gonna take a front-end developer? So now let's look at it like this. We have a
Mm.
front-end developer that understands design, like basically knows how to use Figma, a regular front-end developer, right? And he or she, right? They're looking forward to translate, right? Or transition
Mm.
into design engineering. And like what do you think could be the duration? Like on top of your head, right? What could be the duration? How long do you think it's gonna take for for a front end developer to be able to say, okay, they are ready to go into the market or they're ready to start applying for roles at these big companies as a design engineer?
It's a very interesting form of question that you asked because so let's take it piece by piece. You know the normal tools of the front end developer, which is the code environment and things like that. Which I forgot to mention,
Yeah.
by the way. We do use like GitHub and Vercel and things like that, which you kind of also have
Yeah.
to be familiar with. And Linear we use for issue tracking, which is beautiful. I love it. And Slack, of course, to communicate with the team. But just the regular tools that everyone uses at tech companies. Anyway, so you know those tools. You know how to write code. And you also know, let's say, Figma and image editing and things like that. You said something very interesting, though, which is you said, let's say that you know design, which means that you know Figma. I would argue that knowing design is very different from knowing Figma.
Okay.
Knowing design is so we come back to like the first sort of idea that I talked about, which is human factors in UX
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
graphic design and some motion design and things like that. So knowing design is more about those things for me rather than knowing Figma, because tools like
Hmm.
Figma or any design tool out there. I remember a time. I'm somewhat old compared to tech industry standards. I'm 37 now. And when I started building websites and interfaces, I was maybe 15 or 16 when I started learning HTML and things like that. Figma did not exist at that time. We used
Hmm.
Photoshop for some things, and there was some other GIMP and some other programs for image editing. And there will be a time, presumably maybe 5 or 10 years from today, when we are not using Figma anymore, but we're using something else. So those tools don't mean knowing design. In my mind, when you say knowing design, it's about these principles of graphic design, the terminology of graphic design and typography. Like, do you know what kerning and leading and line height and line width and those things are, and what the sort of proportions and the aesthetic sort of ideas should be around how you structure page margins and columns and things like that? Do you know about the reading habits of people and how the human eye works and how color contrast is perceived and things like that, even
Hmm.
down to like biological ideas of how the eye works and how light is perceived in its various wavelengths and colors in the human eye and processed in the human brain. So knowing design to me is about those things. It's about art history and creative direction. You know the cultural connotations and ideas of various colors and various surface qualities and geometries and aesthetic movements throughout the history of, design and art and so on. And those timeless things, I think it's those things that front-end developers will have to acquire. It's not the usage of a particular tool, but it's a knowledge of, if you go back to like the very foundational level, it's a knowledge of human biology as it relates to the organs of sensing and perception, the eye and the cognition and the brain and hearing and all of those things. It's about learning art history and the history of creative movements and even political movements and how they express themselves through design and illustration and all of those things. And for that, I would say, if you're interested in those things as a developer, if you already sort of know that, you have some interest in art and design and you have some idea and you've been exposed to these ideas throughout your life somehow as a consumer or as a sort of person who's interested, then formally studying these things and learning them at a level where you can have professional discussions and create professional output that relates to that knowledge would take you, I think, about a year, maybe something around that. I don't want to be too optimistic and say like 6 months, but you have to really know how to, if you're already interested and you have some exposure to design and art and aesthetics and those things, I think it would take you about 6 months to a year to like read up on these sources to understand how to utilize that in a professional context. What are the words that you should be using when you talk about those designs and those things? How do you explain those concepts and those ideas, and how do you utilize them in UI designs and web designs and so on and so forth? So that would take on the order of a few months to maybe a year or 2 years to like really be able to deploy in your work. If you don't already have interest in those things, and if you haven't had any prior exposure, I don't know if it's even a good idea to go into like design engineering or any design related thing because it's the hot topic or because it's fashionable or because it's paying well or whatever. I think it's a much better idea to stick to engineering and go deeper in that, because we need engineers even in the age of AI. We need someone to build the AI, so that is very needed. That's something also that the marketplace values, and in some ways even more than design. I think engineers are a high-level engineer earns higher than a high-level designer. If you look at the salaries and compensation of design and engineering is actually a little higher. So you don't have anything to lose economically, but it has to sort of come from the heart in a way. You have to have that interest, that drive towards design and aesthetics and things. And if you do, going into these resources and doing it at the professional level can be achieved within 6 months or a year, with also practice and making your own projects and trying to find maybe clients or collaborations where you do it together with other people or for other people. So it's not a terribly long journey, I think, if you do it systematically and if you like commit, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day to systematically going through these things.
Amazing, amazing. So far we've talked about design engineering. We've talked about everything about design engineering. Talking about ranging from what it is to how we could make the successful transition, right, to a design engineer as a front-end developer. This episode is packed with a lot of amazing details, and the audience are definitely going to find this very, very insightful. So just one last word I actually want to ask you right now. So you obviously gonna give an advice to people, like just one advice, right, to people that are looking to have a successful transition to a design engineer. Because for me, I think I already got the word right, which is basically, if you want to do this, you have to do it by heart. You have to have a lot of dedication to it. But like, I just want to hear from you, right? One final advice to people out there looking to have a successful transition to a design engineering role.
It's actually not so much advice, but I would say a word of motivation, a word of encouragement, because
Okay.
we are living in an amazing time right now where all kinds of educational resources are available to you. You can go on YouTube, you can go to the bookstore or wherever, it's just like out there. And you don't need a diploma, you don't need an approval from anyone, you don't need permission from anybody to actually start doing design or design engineering or development or whatever, creating things today. You can just get started today and you create things, and eventually, as you keep practicing and doing them without any permission, without any approval, or without any formal education required, if you keep doing them, at some point, which is going to come quicker than you might expect even, you're going to get to a point where people are coming and asking for you to do work for them, where you don't even need to chase the work. So we're living in this time right now where you don't need to go to school to become a design engineer. You don't need anyone's approval. It's amazing. So you can just start now, build your own projects, build your own software interfaces, design your own things, post on social media, post something every day, create a project every week, and you will get there very soon. Because most people, what people don't have, what people don't do, is this sort of consistency and this dedication and this sort of time input. If you only do that, if you have the discipline, if you have the do what it takes, which most people do not, then there's no reason why you will not get what you want. That would be my word of encouragement. Just do it. To paraphrase the sort of Nike motto, you just sit down at the computer, make an interface. Start with AI tools, start with tutorials. Just do the tutorials of the most popular programming languages out there. Just, Google for what is the most popular framework? Is it Next.js or whatever it is? Pick that, go to the official getting started and get started today. And before you know, you will be doing it at a professional level if you just keep doing it. And this goes for design as well, and it goes for any profession, really. It's a fascinating, amazing time to be doing this, because 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this was not possible at this level. This is actually why I left working at the university. I was a researcher and teacher, and I was on track to become a professor. And after COVID especially, I realized, I came to the conclusion that we don't need professors anymore. We don't need universities. We don't need formal education or anything. We have more than enough resources, and what we need is just practice and discipline and putting in the time and effort. And that's it, really.
Amazing. Thank you for taking our time to do this, and also coming on the podcast to talk about design engineering. I really appreciate you taking our time to do this. I think we've come to the end of this discussion, and it's really been an amazing conversation with the experts, who is also a design engineer, right? It's been an amazing conversation, and there's a lot of amazing details, amazing information that you could get out from this episode to add to your already existing knowledge and to your own career to become a design engineer. Thank you guys for staying to this point, and definitely see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Thank you.